Hi, everyone. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Broken Rails 1123rd New Social Environment. I'm Min, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Malù dalla Piccola and Ginevra de Blasio. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Malù dalla Piccola is an artist living and working in Paris. Her multidisciplinary practice spans drawing, painting, sculpture, and performance, exploring the tensions between memory and oblivion, fragility and violence, and the boundaries of science and imagination. Educated at Central St. Martin's, Atelier de Sèvres, and ESAG Penninghen, Piccola has exhibited internationally, including at Perrotin, Timothy Taylor, Rome's Gallery of Modern and Contemporary Art. And our host today, Ginevra de Blasio, is a writer and curator from Rome, now based in New York City. She graduated with a BA in art history and visual culture from University of Exeter and from an MA in visual arts administration at NYU. Ginevra has worked for the Drawing Center, Performa, Fondazione Corsini, 99 Canal, and Paula Cooper Gallery. Currently, she serves as a research assistant to Adam Weinberg, director emeritus of the Whitney Museum of American Art. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Ginevra, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Min, for the introduction and to the Rail for hosting this conversation, and Malù for taking the time after her beautiful show in Mexico. And I will quickly introduce it by saying that the show is entitled Have You Already Been Here? Which is a very interesting title for her first retrospective, not retrospective, I would say museum show, institutional show in the Museum of Antropologia de Xalapa in Mexico City. And it's a presentation of Malù's latest body of work, which focuses on a meditation on navigation, navigation in the sense of boundaries of geography, genre, and also psyche. And this exhibition was really, at least like striking to me because it was positioned curatorially among the museum's iconic Olmec colossal heads that you will see very soon. And she kind of put these heads in conversation with this new body of work, which uses resin, painting, sculpture, costume, and also live performance to probe how the mind reconstructs reality through representation. And so I think the first question that I wanted to ask you, Malù, to start this conversation is the very title. So, have you already been here? Feels both like a question, a familiar phrase, also a recurrent idea in popular culture, almost like a déjà vu, I would say. And I was wondering what inspired this choice for the title, and if this title is a question, who are you addressing?
Um, well, hi, first of all, hi, Brooklyn Rail and Ginevra, and thank you for having me here. The title is indeed formulated like a question, but I deliberately decided to remove the question mark, so it's open to ambiguity. And I arrived at that phrasing because it's one of the first questions that immigration officers ask you when they're questioning you when you come into another country. And I've been thinking a lot about borders and migration recently, and especially the issues surrounding the closure of borders around the world, whether it's the US or the EU, or indeed in many other countries. But it's also a question about a sort of magical space, a space that is delimited by imagination, or a space that creates and is created by the imagination. And it feels, it's about different ways of seeing. It can also be perceived as a metaphysical question, that has to do with dreams as well. And it's oniric. That feeling when people say, oh, I feel like I've already been here, or when they go, or when they say like, I feel like I've been here for a very long time, or like I've been here in my dreams. There's a sort of nearness, quality of like proximity as well. And talking about imagination, for instance, I've been reading a lot this psychiatrist that I think I already told you about, called Raphael Gaillard, and he questions what could have been selected through evolution, and he asks the question of the selection of psychological disorders during evolution. These disorders are obviously the source of terrible suffering, so it's surprising to see a kind of destination in them, something that would have selected them through evolution. And yet the genes are in our genome as Homo sapiens, and they're not in Homo neanderthal, as if they accompanied us through evolution. And we can ask what has been selected and what seems to have been selected. And he says that it's this incredible ability of our brain to reconstruct the world and navigating in something other than reality. So we are no longer in possession of the real. So the idea is that we manipulate representations of the real, and it's an incredible power, but it's a risk as well, and the risk of getting lost and unfortunately experiencing psychological disorders. And it's the idea so that we manipulate representation of the world, but not the world itself. And, you know, spending time in New York lately made me, and to this proximity of madness in a literal sense, you know, to see, yeah, it made me want to explore Gaillard's work even more.
So were you thinking about these ideas of giving this kind of like sensation to the audience when making these works?
This idea of, yeah, I mean, I don't know, in a way I was trying to bring them to imagine a different world, and play with these dualities.
Absolutely. And this is actually, I wanted to kind of underline what we're looking at now. This image kind of shows these Olmec heads that were made by the Olmec civilization, and there are these monumental stone sculptures. And so let's say, you know, they're obviously like a very strong presence in the museum and in the aesthetic and curatorially, like an advantage and also a limit. I was wondering if it was challenging for you to work with such incredible, let's say, piece of history, and if you thought about a relationship between your works, maybe specifically the sculptures and these heads, and you know, if in this creative process there was a conversation around them.
So yeah, definitely. I mean, seeing for the first time the Olmec heads was mind-blowing and very difficult to describe. It's just the scale and the perfection. So yes, the archaeological context definitely shaped the themes and materials that I decided to work with, both directly and indirectly. And I feel like the Olmecs, who are a proto-Mexican civilization, they lived between 1200, 400 BCE and carved these stone heads. Only 17 of these heads were found, and nine are in the Xalapa Museum of Anthropology, which is a huge number. I had seen the first ones in Villahermosa, in the Parque de la Venta, which is the other place where they mostly are, in the ground, in the same way as they were found. And what's interesting is that the Olmecs were the first sculptures that we know of in Mexico, so they're super important. And I try to reflect that in my resin work, which is called Olmec Portal. I wanted to find a way to dialogue with these ancient sculptures, include them in my work, because the exhibition space that has been chosen for me in the museum is directly between two magnificent Olmec heads. So I did a mask, this resin mask inspired by the heads in transparent resin that almost looks like glass. And even though you cannot see it in the picture, there is a copper wire sewn in the shape that it looks like a hand, and it's like crystallized inside of the resin. And I sunk that resin into a base of dough, cooked in my kitchen oven, and then treated that with resin. And I think my artist and curator friend, Katerina Cherbakova, inspired me with her soul dough sculptures. And since I was, I had to find a way to do this base quickly, and I wanted to have this effect of earth. I thought it was the best way to do it. And I wanted this combination between perishable and unperishable, that which lasts and that which does not. And some other Mesoamerican heads, like that are in the museum, really inspired me, that have this kind of Janus face, this double face that allows you to understand different ways of seeing. And what to me is so remarkable about the Olmec heads is their three-dimensionality. Moving around them, you get a different perspective and different idea of them as you move in one sense, like clockwise and counterclockwise. And they're just so massive that they make you think of deep structural mass. And I think it makes you feel like a child again, and you're just like a tiny little human. And it's funny how it makes you want to touch them. I had the same feeling recently with Camille Henrot's incredible exhibition at Hauser with her monumental, playful sculptures. And there were other sculptures in the museum that really struck me. There are sculptures about women with snakes around their waist. And it has been theorized that they were created to commemorate women that who died in childbirth and transform them. So it's like transforming them into this kind of goddesses. So yeah, the Olmecs in general made me think about sculpture, and this exhibition is the first time that I have exhibited works in cast metal. I've used copper before in my works, but it was always hammered copper. And I did 2 stanchions for these exhibitions and boots that are cast in aluminium. They are a response to an object that is both very material and then somehow degraded. And of course, you see this degradation of the Olmec heads thanks to time. And they're also sort of worn away in this very interesting way. Like, for example, they were used as grinding stones by later civilizations who perhaps didn't know what they were. And I was interested in the boots, for which I casted a very old pair of my own boots that have made many journeys, migrations, dances, and they were left abandoned. They are hiding somehow the traces of the steps that they made. And the fact that I casted them in metal, in a way, reflects them getting torn and almost destroyed, which also reflected a sense of time passing, I guess. Yeah.
So it's very interesting what you were saying about the Olmec heads and your impression. And it was kind of interesting for me to the contrast between your impression of the Olmec heads and the way in which you placed your mask sculpture, because you were saying kind of like this relationship with like going around the sculpture, but you also decided to place your sculpture between in a confined space, right? Within this like kind of vitrine. Where was that like a choice? And also being this like a mask that is a tool for performance in a way. Were you thinking about these ideas and like to use the mask versus to look at the mask?
Yes, this is a very interesting question actually, because originally this mask was, I originally created it to as an object that was gonna be activated during the performance that I did during the opening day. But then it turned out that it was too fragile with the copper string that was coming out of the resin, and it was impossible to use it for the performance. And the curator of the show, Fernan Gonzalez, proposed to put this glass around it, like all the other like ancient sculptures are presented in the museum, as if it was like ancient. And I thought it was funny. And the people that come into museum, that piece is sort of in the entrance of the museum, so everybody kind of thinks that it's ancient, and then they realize obviously it's not.
That is very interesting, actually. And I kind of wanted to move forwards now to speak about the paintings because they're the largest body of work in the exhibition. And what I kind of like noticed, just to start speaking about the paintings, is that all of them together makes me identify this like kind of theme of navigation across internal and both external landscapes that really like recurs in a very subtle way, but the more you start to see it, the more you can't unsee it in a way in all of the paintings, at least for me. I was wondering if you can speak a bit more about this interest in this concept of navigation and what exactly are you trying to convey?
Definitely. So the navigation is an interesting choice of word. Navigating where and why. I grew up moving between houses. I don't think I spent more than 3 or 4 years in the same house ever. And I wanted to talk about migrations, but also travel. And I think that's this kind of, there's like a really interesting interplay between the person who has stepped over the boundary and the person who is already across the boundary, and whether that boundary is physical, spiritual, mental, linguistic. Language is also quite an interesting aspect of all of this. It's also these questions are also key to ask, and it doesn't just have to be spatial. There's a question about how we create the space in order to live, and what that space actually means to different people, and how people experience different places. And what I'm trying to do in my work is question the way that the viewer approach my art, and perhaps even have this sense of somebody coming to it not once, not twice, but different several times, and get like different meanings each time. And that's why I think I want to work with these ephemeral figures, these figures who are almost sort of blown away by the wind. And for example, in the square painting Les Guerriers, there's this sort of sense of Paolo and Francesca, two characters who made their most famous appearance in Dante's Inferno, and they were blown around in one of the circles of hell to be tossed in the wind. But I also think that about that windy space and what it means in terms of settling down. Is it like hell to travel, or is it heaven? Maybe direction is what matters in the end. And perhaps there are like two kind of artists, the one who are nomad and the one who settled down. Sometimes you don't have a choice, life makes it for you. But or could we be like birds like birds migrate freely in a way that we're not allowed with all these boundaries and frontiers. Perhaps we should be inspired by them to adapt or survive. I don't know. I think about these lines and these frontiers that are often randomly drawn. Oh my God! Sorry, I think I muted you, or did you? Are you muted?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was muted. I was saying that, you know, this perfectly matches this kind of like duality that exists in the works, because like even in this painting that we have in front of us, you know, it looks like a kiss, but it also looks like a very sad scene. And there are hints of migration, of loss, of rupture, but also there are like these delicate atmospheres and intimate scenes at the same time. And so as a viewer, you are looking at these images and you're wondering which direction they're kind of like taking, right? And you are unsure if you're witnessing like a scene of grief or tenderness, or maybe both together coexisting in the same reality. So I was wondering if this kind of like ambiguity is something that was intentional, if it's just like an observation that I'm having and maybe you're not seeing. And, you know, if this interplay kind of like nurtured the works or not.
No, it's very interesting. When you see a painting, you know, you're experiencing it at once. But when you're painting it, you have many different emotions, whether it's joy, anger, frustration, struggle. And yeah, it's a constant fight. And it's difficult for me to know when to finish, when to stop. And so a painting can start out as one thing and then sort of turn into something quite different, or at least it's my experience. And I don't know, at the same time, I think I have this desire not to make anything too absolute and not to make anything too definite. I became like very interested with trying to work on this performance that I did in the Théâtre de l'Absurde, which has it's a movement that became famous after the Second World War and destabilized the heavy realistic traditions that preceded it. And it's like absurdist plots and gibberish like Gramlo, you know, this to question the meaning of language and narrative. And it was in some way, I think, the predecessor of post-structuralism or the revolutions of the 60s and 70s. And in some ways, I think we're in a similar situation now, like we're inundated by these images of brutality and cruelty every day on our social media, on Instagram, and at least for me on Telegram as well. And I find it very difficult to go from a war video to an AI video of a bunny running in, like talking to flowers or something. And so going back to your question, I think I found a way to play with these dualities. If you look at the painting Palimpsest, for example, it's called Palimpsest of Us. Like palimpsest is a powerful metaphor. I explore what it means when that kind of writing is applied to human figures in the bath, which also has a layer of humor, of course. You don't know whether to laugh or to question or stand back. Are we seeing an intimate moment or just a memory of one? And so, yeah, I continue going back to working on memory and oblivion a lot. And these palimpsests or erasures are a way that I found to picture this research. And I have a very instinct way of painting with many images in my head. I sort of superpose them into the canvas, and I prepare the fabric that is stretched with marble dust. When it's still wet, I play with the surface, engraving things like many ancient cultures did. And yeah, I think that's part of the act of making art, this play between groundedness, like rootedness, versus migration, loss, and rupture, and then exploding that. And I think there's something uncanny, like mysterious about the way that art has the power to haunt, even though you know that it's not a living being, but it can be the memory of one, and perhaps it has a spirit or a sort of ghost. And in many ways, art is the lingering of some kind of baby spirit that carries with it an idea of what has been displaced. Yeah, I think, yeah, voilà.
Yeah, and I think that this kind of like subtle duality in a way, this openness in the works also makes their political and commentary in a way stronger, because you are not, forced to see it necessarily, but if you want to see it, you can see it. So I mean, at least this was like my relationship with the works. And I think that in a way, intensifying this even further is kind of like your very delicate palette, which maybe is more visible if we go to the next slide. You have this like palette of purples and pinks that kind of like soften the works, but also intensify this like dual narratives of displacement and intimacy at the same time. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about, these hues that are recurrent throughout your practice, not only in this exhibition, and in what ways do these colors like shape the tension or harmony between loss and tenderness in your works?
Yeah, so my goal is, I think, to present images that address violence without representing violence. Otherwise, it's sort of perpetrating violence. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking of Doris Salcedo. I don't know if you know her.
Of course.
Work, her one of my favorite contemporary works ever is a work of hers called Fragmentos in Bogota, which is a floor with melted metal from guns, and they're hammered down during a performance with women who have been sexually abused doing this hammering these sheets of metal down. And the work disappears. It's just a floor. And I don't know, I think it's unbelievable. And going back to my use of color, well, first, I think I'm very sensitive to color. I'm actually allergic, ironic, it's ironic, but I'm allergic to a lot of dyes and break out in rashes from them, especially orange and yellow. And I think that color is incredibly powerful in shaping the eye and the perspective and the approach to a piece. It can drag you into a painting like Rothko does beautifully, for example. And, purple is a color that to me is very important. Firstly, it has a huge range. And then in Mexico, it has a very deliberate political significance around feminism, femininity, but also against crimes against women. But I don't want my work to be overly political, even though it is a fight that I support, of course. And I've used purples for a long time before this Mexican show. So I think that there's this kind of really interesting range that you can get when you're using purples, even though, it's not, it might not be the most popular color to paint with, it might not sell as well as red or blue, but in purple you have the warmth of red and the cold of blue, and the mix, the mélange that makes something cold and hot at the same time. I find that very beautiful. And what I find interesting as well is that it's the color of shadows. In the history of art, like it's a home, but it's not yet a home. It's a shadow home. And can be also the color of sunset or sunrise, like these half lights, and the time between. And not everybody likes purple. That's, I think, another thing that I like about it. It sort of connects you to this fleeting moment, and perhaps it's also the color of dreams as well. I don't know.
I was wondering, I mean, you being Italian, I was wondering if this is a reality, but at least for me, being raised in such like religious iconography, blue is so reminiscent of like the Virgin, the Madonna, and purple also a very religious color related to cardinals and very much used in the Vatican. And I was wondering if this is a case, or have you ever thought about it?
I never thought about it. I have a strong feeling about the colors used for the Madonna, for the Virgin Mary. And it was originally red, and it became blue when red became accessible as a pigment, and blue was more rare and expensive, lapis lazuli blue, you know. And purple was very expensive as well, because it was made, can't remember, from coquillage, which they still do. They still do it like that, and in some parts of the world when it's not chemical, and I don't know. I never thought about purple as the color of cardinals, but I thought about it recently, that it's the color of Easter, actually, because while being in Mexico for the show, there were all these purple ribbons everywhere, and I didn't understand why. And then I understood that it's because it's the color of Easter, and the priest is dressed in purple, and the churches are purple, decorated during Easter, and yeah, I thought it was very beautiful.
It is. It's a beautiful color, although a lot of people don't like it.
Yeah.
But another thing that, like, since we're speaking about, like, let's say the formal qualities of your work that is not as visible through images is, you briefly mentioned it, the thickness of your works, because I've seen them in person and they have this beautiful texture to them because you use different materials, let's say, to play around, and sometimes you engrave in it. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that process in your work.
Yeah, so I usually for my paintings, I don't know, I think I'm still experimenting, but I have been working a lot with marble dust, and in a way I wanted to achieve this like fresco
Quality.
quality, like, yes, like you can find in Pompeii or in these ancient cultures, and a way that I found to obtain this very, you can have with marble dust, which what is really beautiful is that you can have these very smooth surfaces, but you can also have it more grainy, adding some other kind of powders to it, and I mix it straight with the pigments onto the canvas, so with some glues. So it's a sort of gesto for me. And then when it's still wet, I engrave it. So I have to know kind of, when I engrave it, I have to know exactly what I'm doing afterwards. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But that's also what's beautiful, I think.
And so it means that you need to work fast because you need to work when the surface is still wet, I imagine. Do you like layer the
Yes, sorry, I layer a lot, and it actually dries in, like, depending on how thick it is, but it can take 2 days to dry. So it's like working with, then I paint on top with oil, so it's the same. It's always 2 days to dry completely, and I love it too, that I have time to still work on it and modify things over 2 days.
Great. I mean, now as a time manager too, I would love to invite to switch the conversation on the third part of your exhibition, which was the performance. Because I know that you collaborated with the actor Francesco Zecca on a performance that it was based on a poem made for the exhibition specifically. So I was wondering if you could start by introducing, the performance, your collaboration with Francesco, and how this kind of, working with this text, came about, and how what it did it reveal about your practice.
Yeah, so the performance was really interesting. It involved it involved Francesco Zecca, an Italian actor who is to me just incredible talent. He has this strength of understanding and transmitting, even if he doesn't speak the language of his audience. Francesco was acting a work of poetry by the writer Nicholas Niarchos, my partner, and I spent time with Nick explaining what I wanted, and I gave him some constraints and references, like David Antin talk poem written without punctuation, some passages of Antonin Artaud, some Théâtre de l'Absurde, and he wrote this beautiful poem that explored the themes of boundaries, of fragments, and how these fragments are displaced in a sort of migration across the page. And now Francesco read the poem, he interpreted it, he digested it, he used it, and turned it into his own performance. And in this performance, he was speaking a language that was unfamiliar to most of the room, Italian, and he familiarized with the Spanish-speaking audience in a very interesting way. It was interesting because this audience, who at the beginning professed not to speak Italian, soon accommodated itself and became comfortable with the way that he was moving around the room, sometimes even physically. He was taking people by the hand and moving them across this imaginary boundary created by two bronze sculptures linked by a painting that I created for the show. And he was sort of lifting the barrier between the two bronze stanchions, like in the airport, these stanchions with the elastic between them. And at the same time, when he was he was urging people to come in and out to this imaginary boundary, and I was on a column sewing a flag. He actually took me and put me on the column at the beginning of the performance, as if I was a doll and as if I couldn't move, and then put a needle in my right hand and a thread on the other, and sort of told me I could start, as if I was a Pinocchio. And I was making this sort of imaginary flag on a latex sculpture that looked like skin in this deep flesh tone, and I was exploring what it meant to create a flag that is human. It's not simply a non-human representation of a concept like nationalism. It also questioned the very explicit and very masculine black and white, or red, white, blue, green, yellow, or whatever color scheme that comes with this sharply delineated flags.
And there are some beautiful images of the performance that I saw, where exactly these ones, where you kind of also invited the public to interact, and Francesco was speaking to, there's I think an image after exactly him, let's say, interacting directly with the public. I was wondering if, this was intentional, and how this interaction came about. How did people, take it?
I love that image with the child. What's interesting is that one person moved and then others followed. Basically, people would gather together until one person decided to move and to make the migration between one area to another next to the Olmec head and between the imaginary barrier. And oftentimes that was actually a child and people would follow the child. So there was this really interesting sort of examination of people, like people follow one another in their journey across boundaries. And I designed a small paper booklet that looked like a passport with absurd questions like, why have you come here if you're already here? If your bag is lost, does it still exist? Some like silly little questions like this. And plus it contained Nick's poem, and I wanted everybody to be able to read it. And there was many funny moments during the performance that I didn't actually notice because I was in a sort of trance while I was showing the latex. The latex was really hard and I had to concentrate a lot to actually break the skin. And it's funny, I didn't want to have any video recordings of the performance, just pictures, but my mother recorded the whole thing and I'm so happy I have it now. In my mind, the whole thing was very different and very short. It was actually funny. The interaction with the people was beautiful. It reminded me why I always go back to relational art, like Maria Lai or Yoko Ono. And in doing the costumes, I was really inspired by Leonor Fini, and my corset was realized by a girl in Rome, La Villa Clementine, and Francesco's costume was realized by the curator, Fernan Gonzalez.
It's interesting that you mentioned Maria Lai because as Italian women, I'm sure we can relate to our passion for her. But in a way, like definitely I thought about, relational art too when seeing this, but even, your work with the sewed boundaries, just the image before, that, makes me think a lot about Maria Lai's, sewings and textiles. And I was wondering if you were thinking about her work in this very moment, just because it's very familiar to her works that are actually also on now at Magazzino in New York. So with these kind of like illegible scriptures.
Yeah, I'm dying to go see that show. I haven't seen it yet. Well, so my action during the performance was passive, and Francesco interacted with the audience, setting clear boundaries that the audience came to understand. And yes, I always go back to relational performances, and especially Maria Lai's performance that is called Legarsi alla montagna, which is considered Italian first relation performance, I think. So she asked her entire village, Ulasai in Sardinia, to tie themselves up to the mountain after an earthquake. And when I saw the images of her performance in her foundation in Ulasai, it really profoundly touched me. And I think that Maria Lai demonstrated art's power to make us feel more united. Without that, I think she says something like that we're not human beings. And so during my performance in the museum, audience members became sort of threads in the living tapestry, and their movement dictated by Francesco Zecca's improvisations. And children often led these migrations, showing how innocence can help break down all barriers. And I was doing an imaginary flag.
Absolutely, the thread is like a symbol of unition and as you were saying, like strength too, though. That is very interesting. Thank you, Malù. Also, I wanted to speak a little bit about this video collage that you made because it was very interesting because you intercutted like footage, many very diverse footage. Some were showing you drawing on your body, you and Francisco like peeling, this like skin layer, and then, but there were also images of like drifting clouds and recurring motifs that are also identifiable in your paintings too. So I was wondering if this practice of weaving into this larger narrative of the exhibition, and how does this video offer like a different perspective on the central themes, and even, the diversities of the mediums that you are using, if, these mediums are kind of like showcasing what you're trying to say in a different way, and if they complete each other in a way.
Yeah, so I worked on some videos in the past, but I only showed one once during an exhibition and performance in Rome called Dannazio Memorie. And I investigated a relation to memory and oblivion. The main question of the show was, where do things we forget go? And I was exploring our brain in MRIs with scientists to see where the traumas are stored. And working on this exhibition made me want to explore this medium again. I wanted to question the relation to our skin and body, hence the use of latex as an invisible mask that we peel off our face. And that is also actually a thing that Francesco does during the performance. I forgot to say. And all of this, we're doing all these actions while reciting the poem. So the next poem was the sound of the video. We were reciting it live as if we were on a Zoom call. And there are lots of scenes where I recreate dreamlike moments from my paintings in a Dario Argento inspired lighting. And indeed, there were scenes where I drew on my body, on my belly. It's a recurrent theme in my work, pregnancy, or should I say the lack of, the right to decide about our bodies, or being a mother without children.
Thank you. This must have been a very strong, kind of like intimate video, I imagine. And I mean, what I would like to like highlight now is that until now we kind of like realized it, and at least got a sense that the show clearly like weaves in political themes at times, more lightly, and at times a bit more explicitly. Immigration and displacement among them, also, considering the location of the show. So I was wondering if you could expand on how these issues like inform your work, and in what ways representing and presenting these works in Mexico shaped your approach, or the conversation.
Yeah, so I think that art should not be activism, although some artists might disagree. My friend Apollonia Skoll is very political and in a beautiful and powerful way, for example. But Mexico is definitely a place that is at the center of discourses around migration, borders, and boundaries, especially today. And so clearly, that aspect of things fascinated me, and putting the figures that had inhabited me, my imagination, into such a place was an experience that centered them in a remarkable way. And I wanted people to understand the fragmentary nature of my works and understand how these figures in my paintings suffer and live, just like us. Yeah.
And then there is this painting of the swan, which I think like perfectly kind of relates to what you're just saying in a way, which is, a widespread folk tale that explores the tension between freedom and captivity, and these like porous boundaries between the human and the otherworldly. So in a way, it's kind functions a bit as a metaphor to what you were saying. Do you agree with this, or?
Definitely. This painting is called L'exil du poète, the exile of the poet, and it's very much inspired by Baudelaire's poem Le Cygne that was introduced to me by Robin Buchholz, Bubenberg's gallerist, who offered me a solo in Switzerland last year. And Baudelaire's poem, Le Cygne, it means the swan, reimagines the swan as a symbol of existential exile and displacement. And the swan in the poem escapes from the cage and drags his wings on Parisian pavements. And it's an image of feeling lost and out of place in a modern city. And the swan, once free, wanders through Paris, missing his home. And this reflects how people like the swan can feel exiled or unable to find what they truly want or their home. I think Baudelaire also compares the swan's sadness to other exiles in Greek mythology, and that made me think very strongly about censorship and freedom of speech by comparing the swan's forced exile, displacement to an artist or a poet's censorship.
Absolutely. And how is this work related to the one that we see on the right, which is untitled, but like these kind of like strings kind of even almost give a sense of the prison that you were speaking about? Or is this more of an attempt to demonstrate your interest in weaving, as we were speaking before?
Yes, that's a drawing on paper with copper strings that are sewn into it. I think I didn't really understand what I was doing at first, and then somehow it made sense, and yeah, it's. I think you can interpret it as a barrier, as if this hand was in prison.
Yeah, I can see like a hand in the back. Is that a hand? Because you can't see it very clearly.
It's a hand with the shape of a gun.
Ah, right, right. Well, speaking about hands, actually, we can conclude with my favorite work. It's also here. I mean, there is this picture on the right which kind of shows the scale, but when I've seen it, it was very beautiful to see, I don't know, such a big painting that focuses on such a small detail in a way, and hands are so attractive, at least to me, and so I think meaningful and tell a lot about people. But in a way, these final works kind of like give me the sensation, at least, of hope, like hope as a through line despite the like dissolution and uncertainty, of everything that is hinted in your other works. And so I was wondering if this is something intentional, if like hope is actually a gesture towards like renewal and possibility in your show, and what is kind of like the taste in the mouth that you wish to leave to the audience after seeing your show.
Yeah, I think the world is already hard enough, and I want people to feel like they can escape, dream, love through my work, but also make them reflect on pretty tough and important subjects, I guess. And I'm not a journalist. My goal is not to document. So with all the images in my head, I try to bring you somewhere else, perhaps somewhere tender or fragile. And I think it's important to doubt, especially in this time. And in these dark times, we should be hopeful, fighting for one thing only, which is peace. And I try to make everything hopeful, I think, perhaps because I'm optimistic. I think I'm not always optimistic, actually. In this exhibition, I wanted to be anyway. We can take the images I paint, and while not diminishing the horrors, move towards the subtle beauty, one that points beyond destruction, you know, and through the power of creativity, they transform horror and brutalization into a form of excitement and into a form of pleasurable and dreamlike apprehension of images. I also think that, so you were talking about the open palm, the hand painting. Could be an open palm, could be a sign of peace and welcome, but it can also be a barrier, like, you know, when you stop. And the idea that it's a hand and a shadow of a hand against the sun, the fingers become red and orange from the sun, like translucent, and that's orange is a color that I rarely use, actually, but I felt like it was appropriate here. And in Ho pescato due amanti, the other painting, the same size as this one, they're actually one next to the other in the museum. It's the green painting. It's about two people being fished on a fishnet, but it is also about both states, solidity and shadow, and getting lost in the sea and getting lost in this sort of Paolo and Francesca type of tempest. But it's also about getting lost and finding someone else and being saved. So I hope that it's pretty hopeful.
Thank you, Malou. I think these two last paintings really close the circle for all of the topics, you know, of duality that we were speaking about earlier. And yes, so I think now it's the time to open some questions up to the public, if they do. But thank you so much, Malou.
Thank you so much, Ginevra.
Thank you, Malù and Ginevra. That was so brilliant. We have some questions, which I'm going to ask, but we encourage everyone to submit their questions through the link in the chat. I have the first question. I have two questions for you, actually. I was wondering if you can speak a little bit about like the temporal gap of the works that are in the museum, which are prehistoric, and then your works and what it means to show the two works kind of side by side and in times, almost like replicating in the resin work that you created, what it's like to create that temporal and spatial relationship. And then my next question was, you work in various mediums, and I was wondering if there's like a way in which you choose to work in painting versus sculpture and performance, and how you decide on bringing together different types of works into one piece, as you did in the performance piece.
Sure, thank you, Min. So the first question, I think I did these paintings, these works these last 2 years, and I thought it is pretty interesting to have them next to these ancient works, and it really shows the idea of time passing, as you were saying. But it's I don't know. I felt also overwhelmed by the beauty of these ancient works in the museum, and so they were a huge source of inspiration, but also a struggle, and I didn't want to. I wanted to create a dialogue between the two and not do something completely different that didn't relate. And your second question was all the mediums. So I think it really depends on what I'm trying to express. Originally, I'm more of a painter, and then I began doing sculptural works a few years ago. And I feel like sometimes painting is too restrictive, and you cannot say everything that you want to say in paintings sometimes, and so I started exploring other ways of expressing myself. And as I was talking about Doris Salcedo, I loved her way of approaching subject, social cause, and then turning it into something very conceptual and beautiful. And I think I'm going more and more towards that, but I still continue painting because I don't think I can live without painting. It's something that I do every day.
Thank you. We have a question from an anonymous member in the audience. They were curious what a day in a studio is like for you.
So I travel a lot, so I don't have a regular day in the studio. Sometimes I wish I did, but when I prepare an exhibition and I have to be in one place, whether it's an artist residency or a studio that I rented for a few months, then I think I do create my routines by going to the studio not super early. I usually like to read and take a coffee, take it slow in the morning, and then I'm very productive in the afternoon and evenings. And I can stay until very late in the studios when I'm preparing a show.
That provides a perfect segue into our next and last question. Combine two questions. One is anonymous question or anonymous member in the audience. They're curious what you're reading right now. And then another question, you've touched on this briefly, but they're curious about artists that you were inspired by, who I think we can define artists, writers, or of any kind.
So what I'm reading right now, I'm reading the book that my partner is writing. There's still a manuscript. It will come out next year. And it's about electric batteries and this war of energy, and how it's this green energy that is not so green. Recently, I was also reading all sorts of things for my show. Ravel Gaillard, the psychiatrist that I was telling you about earlier, or I always travel in my purse with some poetry of Etel Adnan that I find very open-minding. And in terms of favorite artists, for me it's a very difficult question because I have so many. But perhaps in terms of friends that I mentioned today, there is Ekaterina Chebakova or Camille Henrot. There would be Doris Salcedo, Maria Lai, Alina Shlaparchikov that works with resin, and very, very talented Polish artist that passed away. I love the works of Edith de Kind that was showing in the vitrine of La Bourse in Paris. The photography of Francesca Woodman, Anna Mandieta. In terms of old works, Giorgione, and especially the painting of La Vecchia that is in Venice. Yeah, I could go on, so I'm gonna stop now.
Thank you. Do you want to introduce your reading?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm gonna read the poem that was the base, not the whole poem, just a little extract of the poem that was the base of the performance. And it's called Where Will You Stay? Without a question mark. So here's that passage. Which other places have you been recently? The open field, the cool clearing on the mug of the table steaming, the rings left by the heat on the lacquer, and the abscess and dull voices in the shadow. You are a child in the barn watching through slatted light, waiting for some secret, but the men are talking only of their portfolio. They come, they go, and the building empties, and the coolness of the water that laid on your head dissipates the ring of the mug on your head, and the men sing no longer. The field is cold and the house empty. It must be more than 60 years old that it met their needs, and the men built it in song. It still meets their needs, still cools their brows on a hot summer, still warms on a windy day. It will stand for centuries if you let it. Voilà. Thank you so much.
And we sent a link in the chat where you can read the full poem. So definitely check that out. Thank you so
It's
much.
difficult to read, I'm sorry, because there's no punctuations. I prefer that you read it.
Thank you, Malù and Ginevra. Thank you, Fernand, for their support in preparing for today's program. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their growing support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Martha Rossler and Alexander Albero on the occasion of Truth Is Not at Gallery Level. And as it is a Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you leave. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Malù. Thank you, Ginevra.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, man.
Congratulations on the show.
Ciao, Fang.
Ciao.
Ciao,
everybody.
you.